The old man did not argue. That was the thing that should have warned everyone in that compound. The thing that should have made Precious pause. The thing that should have stopped the next words from leaving his mouth. The old man did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He did not look to his daughter for rescue. He did not say, "Do you know who I am?" He did not say, "I am your father-in-law, not your servant." He did not say anything at all. He just looked at Precious Uzoma, his son-in-law, the man who had married his daughter 3 years ago. The man who was standing beside a black Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon, arm outstretched, holding a bucket and a sponge, telling the old man in a clear, loud, casual voice that the car needed washing, and since he was already in the compound, he might as well make himself useful. The old man looked at him, and then he did something that nobody expected. He smiled, not angrily, not with pity, not with the particular tight smile of a person swallowing their dignity. He smiled the way a man smiles when he has seen something confirm something he already suspected. The smile of a person watching a story write itself. He took the bucket. He took the sponge. He walked to the standpipe. He filled the bucket. He carried it back to the car, and he began to wash. The old man, whose name was Jide for Enyemu, who people simply called Papa Jide, who had arrived that morning with a small bag and a quiet presence, who had come to see his daughter because she had called and asked him to come, who had come not knowing what he was walking into, washed the Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon with a bucket and a sponge, while his son-in-law watched from the veranda and drank cold water from a glass and looked at his phone and did not say thank you when the old man was done. 3 weeks later, Precious Uzoma wished with everything he had that he could go back to that morning, that he could take back the bucket, the sponge, the outstretched arm, the clear, loud, casual voice, that he could go back and kneel, and apologize, and beg. But by then, the old man had spoken, and when Papa Jide Enyemu spoke, the world listened. If your blood is already boiling at what that man just did, if you already know that what goes around will come around with everything it collected on the way, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that like button because this story is going to take you somewhere. Drop in the comments where you are watching from tonight. Every country, every city, every person who has ever watched someone be humiliated for being poor and wanted desperately to know how the story ended. We want you here. Subscribe and let us begin. To understand Precious Uzoma, you have to understand where he came from. Not his family, not his village, where he came from inside himself. Because the cruelest people are not usually born cruel. They are made, slowly, by circumstances that teach them that worth is measured by what you have, by environments that equate poverty with shame, by the experience of being small and deciding, at some point, that being small was the worst thing that could happen to a person, and that making sure other people knew they were smaller than you was the only reliable protection. Precious Uzoma was born in Umuahia, fourth of 6 children. Father, a bus conductor. Mother, sold tomatoes at the roadside. Not a comfortable life. Not a managed life. A genuinely struggling life. The kind where the school fees were always 3 months late. Where the kerosene for the stove ran out sometimes before money came to refill it. Where the children learned to eat less when the provisions were low and not mention it, because mentioning it made things worse. Precious had grown up in that life. And he had hated it. Not the life itself. The way the life made him feel. The way the other children at school looked at the shoes that were one size too large because they were bought to grow into. The way the teacher had once handed back a form that required a school fee payment and said his name louder than necessary. The way neighbors talked about his family with that particular tone. Managing. Struggling. These people are not doing well. Precious had carried these memories. He had stored them. He had organized them into fuel. And he had burned them. He burned them to push himself through secondary school with grades that surprised his teachers. He burned them to get into university in Owerri on a merit scholarship. He burned them through a degree in business administration. He burned them into a job at a financial services firm in Lagos after graduation. And then, the job became a career. The career became connections. The connections became opportunities. And the opportunities, handled with the sharp instincts of a man who had been studying how wealthy people moved since he was 10 years old, became money. Real money. Within 10 years of leaving Umwahia, Precious Uzoma was somebody. A financial consultant. A private equity associate. A man with an office in Victoria Island and a car that cost more than most people's houses. He had escaped. He had climbed. He had made it. And he had decided, in the making of it, that the past was past. That Umwahia was over. That the conductor father and the tomato-selling mother were a chapter he had closed. He visited them. At Christmas. Briefly. He sent money when they called. Not generously. Enough to be done with the request. He did not bring his Lagos friends to Umwahia. He did not mention his parents in business circles. He had drawn a line. Behind the line was who he had been. In front of the line was who he was now. And who he was now did not look back. He met Chidera Enyemu in Lagos. She was working at an events management company. Creative director. She had a particular gift for making occasions beautiful. For seeing what a space could be and making it that thing. She was not from money. Her father, Papa Jide, was a retired secondary school principal. Her mother had died when she was 15. She had grown up in a quiet, orderly, book-filled house in Nui. The house of a man who valued education and dignity above everything. She was sharp, not ambitious in the precious way. Ambitious in the direction of things mattering. She wanted her work to mean something. She wanted the people around her to be real. She wanted a life that was honest. She had come to Lagos at 23 because the opportunities were there. Not to be somebody. To do something. They met at a friend's birthday dinner. He noticed her immediately. Not just the face. The way she spoke. Direct. Without performance. The way she laughed at something that was actually funny without laughing at things that weren't. The way she looked at him. Not impressed by the watch or the car mentioned in passing, but interested in what he said. He found this refreshing. He had been around women who were interested in the position for long enough to recognize immediately a woman who was interested in the person. He pursued her. Carefully. Chidera was not the kind of woman you pursued carelessly. She took 4 months to agree to a proper date. She took another 6 to agree to a relationship. She asked questions. Real ones. About family. About values. About how he treated people. He answered carefully. Not dishonestly. But with the awareness of a man who knew which parts of his character were presentable and which were not. The part that was genuinely attracted to her honest mind. That part was real. The part that was already calculating how she fit into the image of the life he was building. That part he kept internal. She fell in love. With what she saw. With the version he showed her. She did not see the other version yet. She would. Papa Jide came to Lagos for the introduction. He came alone. His wife was gone. His sister came with him. A quiet woman who looked like she missed nothing. They sat in the parlor of the Lagos apartment that Precious had arranged for the meeting. Papa Jide was a tall man. Thin now with age. Gray at the temples. Glasses. The kind of face that had been schooling children for 30 years. Patient, attentive, and capable of seeing through excuses at 50 paces. He looked at Precious. He asked questions. Real questions. Not the ceremonial ones. Real ones. He said, "How do you manage disagreements?" Precious said, "I believe in resolution." Papa Jide said, "What does resolution look like when you are wrong?" Precious said, "I admit it." Papa Jide said, "When was the last time you admitted you were wrong?" A pause. Precious said, "Recently. At work. A client situation." Papa Jide said, "And at home? In personal life?" Another pause. Precious said, "I try to make space for both sides to be heard." Papa Jide looked at him. The look of a man who has heard thousands of answers and knows the ones that are giving the right words without the right substance. He said, "You have drive. That is clear. Drive is good. But drive without humility is a vehicle without brakes. It moves fast. And it crashes badly." Precious smiled. The smile of a man who has heard this kind of statement before and has learned the correct response. He said, "I hear you, sir." Papa Jide said, "Hearing me and acting on what you hear are different things." He said, "I understand, sir." Papa Jide looked at his daughter. Chidera was looking at her father. Something passed between them. The language that fathers and daughters who have been each other's world since the death of a mother develop. A whole sentence in a look. Papa Jide's look said, "I have reservations." Chidera's look said, "I know. I see them too. But let me try." He looked back at Precious. He gave his blessing. Not enthusiastically. Honestly. He said, "I give you my daughter. She is the best thing that has ever been in my life. The way you treat her will tell me everything about the kind of man you are." Precious said, "I will treat her well, sir." Papa Jide said, "Good." He shook his hand. He went back to Nui the following day. He called Chidera that evening. He said, "I gave my blessing because you love him. But I am watching." She said, "I know, Papa." He said, "Your mother would have watched also." She said, "I know." He said, "Chidera, if anything ever feels wrong." She said, "I know, Papa. I'll call." The wedding was a Lagos wedding, which is to say it was large, and expensive, and beautiful. Precious had paid for most of it. Not because tradition required it. Because he had an image to maintain. He invited business partners, clients, the kind of guests who would look at the venue and the cars, and the catering, and the general production value, and update their assessment of who Precious Uzoma was. Papa Jide sat in the front row, in a suit that was well-made but not new. The suit of a retired principal in a small town who had dressed with dignity for the most important occasion of his daughter's life. He looked at the wedding. He looked at the people. He looked at the numbers. He thought about what all of this said about the man marrying his daughter. He smiled when required. He danced when the music called for it. He said the right things. But he watched. He was always watching. The first year of marriage was acceptable. Not perfect. The edges showed sometimes. The way Precious spoke to domestic staff. Not abusively, but with a particular dismissiveness that made it clear he considered them furniture rather than people. The way he spoke about certain families, certain backgrounds, certain categories of people, with a contempt that he dressed as analysis. He would say things like, "That man didn't build anything himself. He married into it." He would say, "People like that don't understand how to manage money. It's cultural." Chidera heard these things. She pushed back. Not every time, but sometimes. She said once, "People like that? What does that mean?" He said, "You know what I mean." She said, "I don't." "Say it clearly." He looked at her. He said, "People who have not worked for what they have." She said, "And people who have worked for what they have and lost it? What category do they go in?" He said, "That's different." She said, "Is it?" He changed the subject. But she heard it. She stored it. The way her father had taught her to store things. For understanding later. Papa Jide visited twice in the first year. Both times, Chidera had organized the visit carefully. She made sure the guest room was comfortable. She made sure food he liked was prepared. She made sure Precious was present, attentive, the version she needed him to be. It worked. Mostly. The first visit was fine. The second visit had a moment. Just one. At dinner, Papa Jide made a comment about something in the news. An opinion. Not a dramatic one. About education policy. He was a retired principal. He had opinions about education. Real ones. Ones formed from 30 years in classrooms. Precious listened. He nodded. And then he said, casually, the way people say things when they have not thought about who is in the room. "With respect, sir, that kind of thinking is why our education system is where it is. Old school approach. It doesn't scale." A silence. Chidera's head snapped up. Papa Jide looked at him. Not angrily. With the particular stillness of a man who is deciding not to respond to something. He said, "You may be right." He continued eating. The dinner ended. But later, when Precious was elsewhere, Papa Jide said to Chidera, "He did not mean to be disrespectful." Chidera said, "No." He said, "But he was." She said, "Yes." He said, Does he know the difference? She said, I don't think he does, Papa. Her father was quiet. He said, the most dangerous disrespect is the kind that does not know itself. She said, I know. He said, teach him, gently, if he can learn. She said, I'm trying. He patted her hand. He went to bed. He went back to Nui the next morning. Year 2. The cracks began to show. The kind that cannot be filled with attentiveness and careful management. The kind that come from the core. Precious had been promoted. Managing director of the West Africa division of the firm. A significant jump. Significant money. Significant status. And with significant status came a particular expansion of the self. He bought the G-Wagon. He renovated the house. He began to speak differently in social settings. With the authority of someone who had arrived. Who had completed the journey. Who was now at the level where he could afford to let the performance of arrival become simply position. Chitara watched this. She was happy for his success. She was not happy for what the success was doing to the person. She said to him one evening, Precious, you have been different lately. He said, different how? She said, larger. Not in a good way. In the way of something that is expanding and doesn't know when to stop. He said, I don't understand what that means. She said, you talked to Nkechi yesterday. Nkechi was their house help. A young woman from the village. Working hard. Sending money home. Chitara said, you talked to her like she was less than a person. He said, I corrected her. She said, you humiliated her. He said, Chitara. She said, in front of guests. For making a small mistake. You humiliated her. He said, she should not have made the mistake. She said, she is human. Humans make mistakes. What you did was not correction. It was cruelty. He looked at her. He said, you are being dramatic. She said, I am being your wife. He left the room. She sat. She thought. She called her father that night. She did not tell him everything. She told him enough. She said, Papa, I need you to come and visit. I need you to see something. Her father said, when? She said, this weekend if you can. He said, I'll come. Papa Jide arrived on a Saturday morning. Early. His bag was small. His presence was quiet. He came through the gate, and the compound man let him in. He walked toward the house. He had been to the house twice before. He knew the layout. He was heading to the front door when Precious came out of the house. Not to greet him. Coming out to look at the G-Wagon. It had rained the night before. The car was dirty. Precious was in shorts and a t-shirt. Holding a glass of water. He looked at the car. He looked at the old man walking across the compound. And Precious Uzoma made the decision that would change everything. Not a dramatic decision. A casual one. The kind of casual decision that reveals what is underneath the performance when the performance is not actively running. He said, Papa Jide. Good morning, sir. Good that you came. Listen, the car needs washing. Since you're here already, can you do it? The bucket and sponge are in the store. Ask Nkechi to show you. He said it the way you say. Can you close the door? Can you pass the salt? Can you do this small thing? As if washing his son-in-law's luxury car was a reasonable request to make of a 71-year-old retired school principal who had traveled from Nui to see his daughter. As if the age was not relevant. As if the relationship was not relevant. As if the dignity was not relevant. As if none of it mattered. Just, can you do it? Papa Jide stopped. He looked at Precious. He looked at him for a long moment with those eyes. Those patient, 30 years of classroom's eyes. And he smiled. That particular smile. And he said, of course. He went to find Nkechi. He got the bucket. He got the sponge. He came back. He began to wash the car. Inside the house, Chitara was in the kitchen. She did not know her father had arrived yet. She did not know what was happening outside. She heard Precious come back in. She heard him sit on the veranda. She heard him speaking to someone on the phone. Loud. About business. She finished what she was doing. She went to the veranda. She saw the empty chair where she expected her husband. She looked toward the gate. She looked at the compound. And she saw him. Her father. Bent over the G-Wagon. With a sponge. Washing. The car of her husband. She stood very still. For a very long time. Something happened inside her in that moment. Something that cannot be described with the ordinary words for emotion. It was not sadness. It was not anger. Those would come. First was something more fundamental. A crack. The final crack. In the structure of everything she had been telling herself about this marriage. About this man. About the choice she had made. She stood and she watched her father wash the car. The father who had raised her alone after her mother died. Who had eaten less than he needed so she could have new books each school year. Who had walked her to the school gate every morning until she was old enough to walk alone. And on the first morning he did not walk her, had stood at the gate of their compound watching until she turned the corner, just to make sure. Who had sat with her through every grief and every confusion and every moment of her adult life that was bigger than she could hold alone. Who had looked at precious Uzoma with reservations and given his blessing anyway because she loved him. Who had traveled from Nui on a Saturday morning because his daughter needed him and was washing a car. She walked back inside. She went to the sitting room. She sat. She breathed. She waited for her father to finish. She waited for everything inside her to finish its rearranging. When her father came in, she stood. She went to him. She held him. She held him for a long time without speaking. He held her back. He said, "I'm okay." She said, "Papa." He said, "I'm okay, Chitara. I'm fine." She pulled back. She looked at his face. She said, "Why did you do it?" He said, "Because he asked me." She said, "You should have refused." He said, "No, I should not have refused." She said, "Papa." He said, "Let me explain something to you. A man who is willing to ask his father-in-law to wash his car has shown you everything you need to know about him. Everything is already there. The question is not whether he should have asked. The question is what you are going to do now that you have seen it." She said, "I saw it." He said, "I know you saw it. I could tell you saw it. That is why you called me." She said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Do not apologize to me for your husband's behavior. You did nothing wrong." She said, "I chose him." Her father said, "You chose who he showed you. That is different." They sat. Her father in the clean shirt he had traveled in, still damp at the wrists where the water had splashed. She looked at his wrists. She closed her eyes. He said, "Chitara, I need to tell you something." She said, "Tell me." He said, "I know things about your husband that I have not told you." She opened her eyes. She looked at him. Papa Jide had done his own research. A year before this morning. Not from distrust of Chitara. From love. From the responsibility of a father who has one child and one chance to protect her properly. He had a former student. A man named Bartholomew Ease who had been in his class at the secondary school 30 years ago. Who was now a senior partner at a law firm in Lagos. Who had offered, years ago, to help Papa Jide with anything he needed. He had asked Bartholomew, quietly, carefully, to look into precious Uzoma. Not illegally. Just the things that can be found. The background. The history. The character references. The real picture. Bartholomew had come back with a report. And the report was not what Papa Jide expected. It was not criminal. Nothing like that. What it was a picture of a man. A full picture. Not just the successful Lagos executive. The full picture. Including the family in Umwahia, who barely heard from him. The father who was still a bus conductor at 64, because his son sent money only when pressed. The mother who sold tomatoes at the roadside and told the neighbors that her son in Lagos was doing well, without knowing exactly how well, because he did not tell her. The woman before Chitara. A woman named Ojeki who had been with him for 2 years. And who had ended it. And who, when Bartholomew's contact found her and asked why, said, "He changed when the money came. He became someone I didn't know. He treated people who couldn't help him like they were obstacles." She said, "He treated my mother like a domestic worker once." That was when I knew. Bartholomew had brought this to Papa Jide. Papa Jide had held the report. He had looked at it for a long time. He had said, "Did you verify this?" Bartholomew had said, "All of it." "Yes, sir." Papa Jide had thought, For a long time, he had thought about telling Chitara. He had thought about waiting. He had thought about what his wife, God rest her soul, would have done. His wife would have told Chitara everything immediately. She had been a direct woman. No waiting. No patience for strategic silence. She would have put it on the table. But he was not his wife. He was a man who had spent 30 years teaching young people that understanding comes from sitting with information, not reacting to it. He had waited. He had watched. He had come when Chitara called. And this morning had told him that the waiting was over. He told Chitara the whole report, sitting in her sitting room, quietly, the way he told her everything important. Like a lesson, not a lecture. A lesson. Chitara listened. She did not interrupt. She did not ask questions until he finished. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The woman before me. Ojeki." She said the same thing. Her father said, "Yes." She said, "He treated her mother like a domestic worker." "Yes." She said, "And today he asked you to wash his car." "Yes." She breathed. She said, "Papa, how long have you had this report?" He said, "A year." She said, "A year." He said, "I was waiting to see if the report was the whole story or part of it. I was watching to see if what was in the report was who he was or who he was becoming. A person can grow. A person can change." She said, "But," he said, "but a person cannot change if they do not know they need to. And a person who asks their father-in-law to wash their car has not had the realization yet." She said, "No." He said, "Chitara, what do you want to do?" She was quiet. She said, "I want to do this right." He said, "What does right look like?" She said, "It looks like him understanding what he did before any decision is made. Not me leaving in anger. Not me making accusations. Him actually seeing." Her father looked at her. He said, "You want to give him the chance?" She said, "I want to give him one chance. One real one. Where everything is on the table. Where he cannot hide behind the performance. Where he has to look at what he is and decide if he wants to be something else." Her father said, "And if he chooses not to?" She said, "Then I will have done what I could. And I will know it is finished." Papa Jide looked at his daughter. The daughter he had raised. The one who had her mother's patience and his clarity. He said, "You are a better person than most." She said, "I learned from you." He said, "I learned from your mother." They sat together. For a while. In the house that her husband had bought. That she had tried to make into a home. Waiting for the man to come in from wherever he had gone. Precious came in at noon. He came in and stopped. Because something was different. The sitting room had a particular quality to it. The quality of a room where important things have already been said. He looked at Papa Jide. He looked at Chitara. He said, "You're both very quiet." Chitara said, "Sit down, Precious." He looked at her. The tone. The particular tone of his wife's voice that he had only heard a few times. The tone that meant this is not a request. He sat. She said, "I saw you this morning. I saw you send my father to wash your car." He said, "It was just." She said, "Precious." He stopped. She said, "I am going to speak. And then my father is going to speak. And I need you to actually listen. Not to prepare your response. To actually listen." He said, "Chitara." She said, "Please." The please. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just, please. He was quiet. She said, "My father came from Nui this morning because I asked him to. He traveled on a Saturday morning because I needed him. He walked through that gate, and the first thing that happened to him was that you told him to wash your car." Precious said, "I didn't mean it as." She said, "What did you mean it as?" Silence. She said, "What was in your mind when you handed him that bucket? What did you think was appropriate about that moment?" He said, "I thought he could help." "I thought." She said, "You thought my father was available to serve you." Silence. She said, "That is my father, Precious. Not a stranger. Not an employee. My father." He said, "I know who he is." She said, "Do you? Do you know who he is?" She paused. She said, "Let me tell you who he is." She told him. She told him about the secondary school in Nui. about 30 years in classrooms, about the education of hundreds of children, about what her father had done for the community he had served. She told him about her mother dying, about her father becoming both parents at once, about every sacrifice, every morning walk to the school gate, every scraped-together school fee. Every evening her father had stayed up to help her with homework by lamplight. Every visit to Lagos on a small pension budget because his daughter needed him. She told him all of it. Quietly. Completely. Precious sat. He had never heard these things. Not because Chitara had not tried to share them. Because he had never fully listened. He had heard words. He had not heard the person. When she finished, she said, "That is who you handed a sponge to." Precious said nothing. His face was doing something he had not planned for it to do. The careful performance was not running. He was just there, in the room, with the truth. Papa Jide spoke. He had been silent through Chitara's speaking. Patient as always, waiting his turn. He said, "Precious." Just the name. Precious looked at him. He said, "I want to tell you something about yourself." Precious said, "Sir." He said, "Not about what you did this morning. About who you are. Because what you did this morning is a symptom. I am more interested in the disease." Precious was quiet. Papa Jide said, "You came from nothing." Precious went still. Papa Jide said, "I know your story. Your father is still a bus conductor in Umuahia. Your mother still sells tomatoes. You have not visited them in over a year. You send money when they call. Not enough. Just enough to stop the call." Precious stared at him. Papa Jide said, "I am a retired school principal. I have no money. I live on a pension that is often late. I am everything that you have decided is below you." He said, "But I am not below you. And neither is any person whose wealth is small, but whose character is intact." He said, "You have built something impressive, genuinely impressive. I am not taking that from you. What you have built materially is real." He said, "But you have been tearing down something else as you build. You have been deciding, each time you make more money, that the people who have less are worth less. That the people who cannot match your position are not worth your full regard." He said, "And the terrible truth about that kind of thinking is that it is a mirror." Precious said, "A mirror?" Papa Jide said, "You despise what you came from. You are ashamed of Umuahia, of the bus conductor, of the tomatoes. And so you put those things in other people and you despise them there. Because the despising at close range is too dangerous." Silence. The kind of silence that only happens when something true has just been said in a room. Papa Jide said, "I know this because I have watched it for 30 years in classrooms. The children who were most cruel to others were always the ones who were most afraid of themselves." He looked at Precious. He said, "What are you afraid of, my son?" My son, said without sarcasm, without irony, said the way a man who has spent his life teaching says things, with the full intent of reaching. Precious looked at the old man, and something happened, something that the performance could not prevent, because the performance was not running, because he had been caught off guard, because he was sitting across from a man who had washed his car without argument and was now speaking to him with more dignity than Precious had shown anyone in years. Something broke. Not loudly. Quietly. Something in the middle of Precious, Uzoma broke. He said, "I am afraid." He stopped. He said, "I am afraid of going back." Papa Jide said, "Back where?" Precious said, "To being nobody." The room was quiet. Papa Jide said, "You were never nobody." Precious said, "You don't know." Papa Jide said, "I know that a boy who put himself through university on a merit scholarship from nothing was never nobody. I know that the man who built what you have built was never nobody." He said, "But the believing that you were nobody, the carrying of that belief into success and using it to look down on everyone who resembles who you used to be, that is the real poverty, Precious." He said, "That is the only poverty that matters, and it is the only one you still have." Precious was quiet for a very long time after that. Not pretending quiet. Not calculating quiet. Real quiet. The quiet of someone who has been handed a mirror and is looking at it for the first time. Chitara watched him. She had been watching him her whole marriage. But this was different. This was seeing without the performance. She saw a man who was afraid, who had been afraid for so long that the fear had become architecture. The way he spoke, the way he treated people, the way he managed the image. All of it was fear, dressed as confidence. He said eventually, "I owe you an apology." Papa Jide said, "You owe me nothing." Precious said, "I asked you to wash my car." Papa Jide said, "You asked me to wash your car. I washed your car. The car is clean. I am still here. Nothing was destroyed by it except the belief you had that you could do that kind of thing without consequence." He said, "What was the consequence?" Papa Jide said, "You are sitting in this room having this conversation. That is the consequence." Precious looked at Chitara. She was looking at him, not with anger, with something more complicated, something that required a decision on his part. He said, "Chitara." She said, "Yes." He said, "I have not been." He stopped. He said, "I have been." He stopped again. He said, "I don't know how to say this without it sounding like I am just saying words." She said, "Try." He said, "I have been managing everyone, including you. I have been showing people the version of me that maintains the position, and I have not been honest about what is underneath it." She said, "I know." He said, "The people I've treated badly. Kechi, your father, the way I spoke about." He stopped. He said, "My own parents." His voice changed on the last two words, changed in a way that Chitara had never heard. She had never heard him say "my own parents" like that, with the specific weight that those words have when you have not let yourself feel what they mean. He said, "I left them." She said, "Yes." He said, "Not just in Umwahia. I left them in myself. I decided they were part of what I was running from. And I have been running." Papa Jide said, "You can stop running." Precious looked at him. Papa Jide said, "It is not too late to stop. The running has not destroyed everything. Your wife is still in this room. Your in-laws are still in this room. Your parents are still alive. The bus conductor is still alive. The tomato seller is still alive." He said, "Go home, Precious. Not to this house. To Umwahia. Go and see them. Not with money. Just with yourself. Just to say, I was here. I did not forget." Precious covered his face with his hands. He sat like that for a moment. When he took his hands away, his face was the face of someone younger. Not performing. Just there. 3 days after that conversation, Precious drove to Umwahia. Not in the G-Wagon. He took a different car. A simpler one. He drove to the house where he had grown up. He sat outside for a long time before going in, looking at the compound, at the walls he remembered, at the evidence of the life he had run from. He went in. His mother was home. She was in the kitchen. She heard the door. She came out. She saw him. Her face, not reproachful, not performed happiness, just light. The light of a mother who has been waiting for longer than she should have had to wait. She said, "My son." He said, "Mama." She held him. He held her. For the first time in what felt like his whole life, he held his mother without calculating what holding her meant for the image. He just held her. She said, "You look thin." He said, "I'm not thin, Mama." She said, "I know what thin looks like. Come and eat." He ate. He sat at the table that had been in that kitchen for 20 years. He sat at the table where he had done homework, where he had eaten the meals that stretched, where he had felt both the weight of what they didn't have and the particular warmth of people who love each other and are trying. He sat there. He ate his mother's food. His father came home in the evening, still the conductor's uniform, still the tiredness of a man who has worked with his hands his whole life. He came in and stopped when he saw Precious. He said, "Precious." Precious stood. He said, "Papa." He went to him. He held his father. His father did not hug back immediately, just for a moment. The moment of a man who has been absent too long and is surprised by the return. Then his father's arms came up, and he held his son. And Precious Uzoma, successful, managing director, G-Wagon owner, Victoria Island address, Lagos executive, cried in his father's arms. in the small house in Umwahia, in the kitchen where the food always stretched. He cried, like the boy who had been afraid, like the person under the performance, like someone who had been running for 20 years and had finally stopped. He stayed 3 days. He helped his father in small ways, not with money, with his hands, with presents. He fixed a gate hinge that had been broken. He painted a section of wall that had been peeling. He sat with his parents in the evenings. He listened to their lives, to the things that had happened in the years he had been too busy to call. He listened the way he had never listened, with all of himself. His mother told him about the neighbor whose son had also left and never looked back. She said it without looking at him. She said, "Some children leave. They have to leave. That is how it works. But you don't have to leave the love behind when you go." He said, "Mama." She said, "I know, my son. I know." His father said, "Come more often. That is all I ask. Just come." He said, "I will." He meant it. This time he meant it. He came back to Lagos. He went to the house. Chidera was there. Papa Jide had gone back to Nui the day after the conversation. He had not asked for anything, not even an apology. He had simply held his daughter at the gate and said, "Be wise." She had said, "I'm always trying to be." He had said, "I know." He had left. Now Precious came home. He sat with Chidera. He told her about Umwahia, about his parents, about his father's arms, about his mother's table, about the gate hinge and the peeling wall. She listened. When he finished, she said, "How do you feel?" He said, "Lighter and heavier at the same time." She said, "That is what telling the truth feels like." He said, "I know." He said, "Chidera, I need to ask you something." She said, "Ask." He said, "Are we okay?" She was quiet. She said, "We are not okay yet. But we could be." He said, "What does could be require?" She said, "It requires the man I just saw in Umwahia to be the man who comes home every day, not the performance, not the managing director, not the position, the man who cried in his father's arms." He said, "That man is not." She said, "He is hard to maintain. I know, especially in Lagos, especially in the circles you move in. But I need to see him here, in this house, with me, with my father, with Nkechi, with everyone." He said, "I don't know if I can always." She said, "Not always. Consistently. There is a difference." He said, "Okay." She said, "Nkechi." He said, "I know." She said, "She deserves an apology." He said, "I know." He apologized to Nkechi. The next morning, not a brief, performed apology, a real one. He stood in the kitchen while she was preparing breakfast. He said, "Nkechi." She looked at him. He said, "The way I have been speaking to you, the way I treated you after the dinner last month, I was wrong. It was not acceptable. I am sorry." She looked at him. She did not say it is fine. She said, "Thank you, sir," which was honest. And he respected it more than if she had said it was fine. He called Papa Jide, not to report, not to perform redemption, to talk. He called on a Thursday evening. The phone rang 4 times. Papa Jide answered. He said, "Precious." He said, "Good evening, sir." A pause. He said, "I went to Umwahia." Papa Jide said, "I know. Chidera told me." He said, "I saw them. My parents." Papa Jide said, "How was it?" He said, "Hard. And good. Mostly good." Papa Jide said, "Yes." He said, "Sir, I want to apologize." Papa Jide said, "You don't need to." He said, "I do. I need to say it. What I did that morning, asking you to wash my car. It was," he stopped. "There is no way to explain it that makes it acceptable. It was not acceptable." Papa Jide was quiet. Then he said, "Why did you do it?" He thought about it. He said, "Because I looked at you and saw what I had come from. And the thing inside me that is afraid of that, it acted before I could think. It tried to put you below me so I could feel above something." Papa Jide said, "And now?" He said, "Now I am ashamed of that morning. and of how long I have been doing versions of that morning with everyone I consider beneath my position. Papa Jide said, "Shame is useful only if it moves you forward." He said, "I know, sir." Papa Jide said, "Are you moving forward?" He said, "I am trying." Papa Jide said, "Good." He said, "Sir, I want to come and see you. In Nui. Not for any ceremony. Just to visit. To sit in your house and know you properly." A long pause. Papa Jide said, "Come on a weekend. I will cook." He said, "You'll cook?" Papa Jide said, "I have been cooking for myself since my wife died. I make acceptable oaf onugbu." He said, "I'll come." Papa Jide said, "Good." He said, "Sir." Papa Jide said, "Yes." He said, "I want to say something." Papa Jide said, "Say it." He said, "That morning, when I gave you the bucket, you smiled." Papa Jide said, "I remember." He said, "What were you smiling at?" Papa Jide was quiet. Then he said, "I was smiling because I had been watching you for 2 years, wondering what would finally crack the surface. Wondering when I would see what was underneath. And you handed me the bucket, and I thought, here it is. Here is the thing that will either break this marriage or save it, depending on what comes after." He said, "And what comes after?" Papa Jide said, "You called me from Umwahia. You called to say you were with your parents. That is what comes after." He said, "Does it change anything for you?" Papa Jide was quiet. Then he said, "A person who does wrong and does not care is one thing. A person who does wrong and faces it is another thing entirely. Yes, precious. It changes things." He said, "Thank you, sir." Papa Jide said, "Don't thank me. Come and eat oaf onugbu." He went to Nui. The following Saturday, he drove through the town he had heard about, but never visited. Through the streets that Papa Jide had walked for 40 years. He found the house. Small. Orderly. The compound of a man who has cared for his things with attention. A garden at the front. Plants that were tended. A veranda with 2 chairs. The house of someone who had nothing excessive and nothing missing. He knocked. Papa Jide opened the door. He looked at Precious. He stepped aside. He said, "Come in." He came in. He looked at the sitting room. Books. Everywhere. The books of a teacher's life. History. Literature. Educational theory. A picture of Chitara as a child on the wall. Her mother beside her in the picture. Both of them smiling at whoever was behind the camera. He looked at the picture. He said, "She looks exactly the same." Papa Jide said, "She has always looked exactly like herself." He looked at the picture for a moment. He thought, "You raised her. You raised her alone after her mother died. You raised her in this house with these books. And she came out like this. Clear-eyed and honest, and the kind of person who says, 'Try. One real chance.'" He thought, "What did this man sacrifice so that she could be who she is?" He thought, "And you asked him to wash your car." He sat down. Papa Jide brought food. Ofanugbu. Rice on the side. He served it without ceremony. He sat across from his son-in-law. They ate. They talked. Not about the car. Not about the morning. Not about any of the recent history. They talked about things. About the state of the country. About the education system. About the years Papa Jide had spent in classrooms. About the students who had come back to find him. The ones who had done well. The ones who had struggled. Precious said, "Do you regret any of it?" The teaching. Papa Jide said, "Not one day. Not 1 hour." He said, "Why not?" The pay was. Papa Jide said, "The pay was modest." Yes. The respect was also modest, sometimes. The resources were never sufficient. He paused. But the work. The actual work. Watching a young person understand something they couldn't understand yesterday. That is not something you can buy. Precious said, "You sound like." He stopped. Papa Jide said, "Like what?" He said, "Like someone who was told the teaching didn't matter, and chose to believe it mattered anyway." Papa Jide said several times, "Yes." He said, "How?" Papa Jide said, "Because I decided the measure of a life is not what other people assign to it. The measure is what you actually did with it. And when I count what I did with mine, It comes to a number I am satisfied with. Precious said, I have not been satisfied. Papa Jide said, with what? He said, with any of it. I have the things I thought would make me satisfied. And I am not satisfied. Papa Jide said, because you were running to something. But running cannot satisfy you. Only arriving can. And arriving requires stopping. He said, stopping feels like. Papa Jide said, it feels like going back. Yes. But it is not going back. It is settling. There is a difference. He said, how do you know when you have arrived? Papa Jide looked at him. He said, you know when you stop being afraid of where you came from. The change in Precious was not instant. Nothing real is instant. Real change is slow. It is the daily choosing of a different behavior. The choosing when it is inconvenient. The choosing when the old pattern is easier. The choosing when you are tired. It was a process. He called his parents more. Not just when they called him. He called. He visited every 2 months. He brought himself. Not money. Himself. He sat with his father in the evenings. He listened to his father's stories about the routes. About the passengers. About the particular world of a man who has moved through the same streets for 40 years. He began to hear something in those stories he had not heard before. He heard a man who had dignity. Not prosperity. Dignity. A man who showed up every day. Who did his work honestly. Who came home to his family. Who had not escaped anything. Who had simply lived. Fully. In the place he was given. Precious sat with his father's stories. And one evening he said, Papa, I owe you an apology. His father said, for what? He said, for being ashamed of you. His father looked at him. He said, I was ashamed. When I was building my career, I didn't want people to know. About the bus. About Umwahia. I thought it would make me less. His father said, it didn't. He said, no. But I was afraid it would. His father said, Precious. He said, yes, Papa. His father said, I knew. He said, you knew I was ashamed. His father said, a father knows. I knew and I decided to wait. Because shaming a man for being ashamed doesn't fix the shame. Only the man can fix it. He said, I'm sorry. His father said, I know. His father said, your mother. She used to say, that boy will come home. He is running, but he will come home. She has been right about most things in her life. Precious laughed. A real one. His father laughed too. They sat in the small house. The two of them. In the compound where Precious had grown up. And Precious felt it. For the first time. He felt it. Arrived. The thing his father-in-law had said. Arrived. Here. In this compound. With this man. Not running. Not performing. Just. Here. Chitara watched. She had been watching since the conversation. She watched carefully. Not suspiciously. The way she watched everything. She watched Umwahia happen. She watched Nui happen. She watched Nkechi's mornings change. She watched the phone go back on the kitchen counter. She watched small things. The way small things are watched. With full attention. Slowly. Month by month. Something was returning. Not the man she had married. Something better. The man underneath that man. The one who had been there at the beginning. Before the position had swelled and filled the space between them. The one who she had seen, in flashes, when he was tired and the performance dropped. That man was becoming the one who came home. Consistently. Not always. Consistently. She told her father. On a Sunday call. She said, Papa. He is trying. Papa Jide said, I can see it. She said, how? You haven't visited. He said, he visits me. She said, he visits you. Papa Jide said, every month. He comes to Nui. He sits and we eat. We talk. He listens. She was quiet. He said, he is not the man he was on the day he gave me the bucket. He is not fully the man he should be either. But he is in between. He is in the direction. She said, is that enough? He said, what do you think? She said, I think it is enough to try with. He said, then try. With everything you have. But keep your eyes open. She said, my eyes are always open, Papa. He said, I know. I taught you that. She said, you did. 1 year after the morning of the car. Papa Jide came to Lagos again. He arrived at the gate. He walked through the compound. The G-Wagon was there. Polished. Clean. Precious was on the veranda. He looked up. He saw his father-in-law. He stood. He came down from the veranda. He walked to the gate. He said, "Papa, welcome." Not from a distance. Walking to him. Taking the bag. Walking beside him. Papa Jide said, "How are you?" Precious said, "I'm learning." He said, "Good." They went inside. Chitara was already there. She had seen her father through the window. She had watched Precious walk to the gate. She had seen her husband carry the bag. She had seen her father and her husband walk side by side. She stood in the doorway. Her father looked at her. That look, the one that was a whole sentence. This one said, "He is trying." This one said, "I see it." This one said, "Your mother would have approved." She smiled. Not with relief. With something deeper. With the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had made one hard decision. To give one real chance. And was watching that chance become something real. The lunch Precious cooked that day. Not something elaborate. Something honest. Jollof rice. He had been learning. Not from a chef. From his mother's phone instructions. Sunday calls where his mother walked him through the steps while he stood in the Lagos kitchen. The rice was not perfect. It was not his mother's. But it was his. Made with his hands. For his wife. For his father-in-law. For the people he had been learning to see. Papa Jide tasted it. He said, "You cooked this?" Precious said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Who taught you?" He said, "My mother." Papa Jide put his fork down. He looked at Precious. He said, "Good." One word. Good. But the way it was said, the weight behind it, said everything. Said, "I see the umwahia in this plate. I see the tomato seller in this rice. I see the man who stopped running. I see the man who came home." This is what the story teaches. Not from a distance. From inside it. The things we are ashamed of do not disappear when we leave them behind. They follow. They wait. They appear at the most revealing moments. In the form of an old man at a gate. In the form of a bucket offered casually. In the form of a face that smiles when it should perhaps have been wounded. The shame of where we come from does not make us better than where we come from. It only makes us smaller than we should be. The bus conductor is not less than the managing director. He is a different kind of man. A man who showed up. Who kept going. Who did not leave himself behind. The tomato seller is not less than the woman who writes the salary of those who sell tomatoes. She is a woman who fed children. Who kept a family together. Who did it without a position. Without a title. Without a G-Wagon. And the child of that bus conductor and that tomato seller. Who arrived. Who built. Who succeeded. He does not have to choose between where he came from and where he is going. He only has to be brave enough to carry both. To let the one make him proud of the other. To let the having arrived feel like the place from which he can finally look back and say, "I did not come from nothing. I came from something. And the something made me. And I am not ashamed." You just watched a man hand a bucket to his father-in-law. And watched an old man smile. Not because it didn't hurt. Because he already knew. He already knew what that moment was. He already knew what it would cost. He already knew what came after. And he let it happen. Because sometimes you have to let a person see themselves. Completely. Clearly. In the reflection of their own actions. Before they can understand what needs to change. Papa Jide did not shout. He did not shame. He did not demand. He just washed the car. And waited. And then. He spoke. And everything changed. If that kind of wisdom reached you tonight. If something about Papa Jide's patience, about Chitara's one real chance, about Precious standing at the gate carrying a bag, about a man who learned to cook his mother's rice. If any of that touched something in you, this channel is your home. Because we tell these stories. The ones with complicated men who are not villains, but are lost. The ones with patient fathers who teach without demanding. The ones with wives who are clear-eyed enough to give one chance and brave enough to mean it. The ones with mothers in Umwahia who say, "He will come home. He will come home." These stories. These African, Nigerian, bone-deep, fireside, Elder told. Grandmother kept stories. They live here. And we need you to be here when we tell them. Subscribe right now. Hit that like button if this story made you think of someone. If it made you think of something you've been running from. If it made you want to call a parent you haven't called in too long. Do it. Right now. Before you scroll. Call them. And drop in the comments. Where are you watching from? And if you are brave enough, drop this. What have you been running from that you already know you need to stop running from? This community holds those answers with care. Subscribe. Come back. Because the next story is already cooking. Slow. Like the rice. Like the real things. And it smells like something worth waiting for. The bus conductor's child came home. And that is the most important thing he ever built.